So this happened at Christmas a couple years ago, when I was spending the holidays with my parents and little brother along with my cousins, aunts, and uncles. We live in a suburb in Ontario, but we were venturing out into the woods for Christmas, an idea that my parents had had for a while. They always loved the idea of being out in a hunting cabin during a Christmas with their families. I'm a 22-year-old female, but at the time I was newly 18, and my little brother Tom was 11. We're really close and do everything together. We also had a dog, a German Shepherd called Trigger, who came along for the ride too. He's a real softie but can be really overprotective, especially of my brother Tom. Anyway, we left our house on Christmas Eve at about 2 p.m. and climbed into our dad's truck, filled with all of our stuff and presents for his extended family. Tom and I were really excited, winding each other up, and my parents were having friendly conversation as we moved along the road. We arrived at the village near the cabins we were staying in, and caught up with my dad's sister Billy, along with her husband and 3 kids. They didn't converse for long, but Billy was a bit unsure of where to go from the village to get to the cabins, so my dad helped her out by writing down the directions. We soon got back on our way and arrived at the cabins at around 4 p.m. There were a cluster of them, sort of spaced out around the woods. Each family had a cabin, and there was one where everyone could meet up with a pool table, a swimming pool, and all sorts. It was kind of a place we could all just chill together and enjoy each other's company. Anyway, the weather was already really cold when we arrived, and the snow was falling all around us. So as me and my brother unpacked our things into the cabin and settled in for the night, my dad started a fire whilst my mom made our dinner. It was great. The Christmas decorations were already up and we played a few board games as the night got darker. Dad, Tom, and I decided before coming on the trip we'd go hunting sometime, so we planned to go the next day. I'd been a few times with my dad, but this was Tom's first time. He was only there to watch us though, as he was too young to shoot. It reached about 10 p.m. and my brother and I were getting a bit tired, so we decided to go to bed. My dad kept his rifles in a bag which he kept under the bed I was sleeping on. He'd usually keep it in a locked box, but thought there was no point since we were going hunting the next morning. Tom and I were sharing a room at the end of the cabin facing a flowing river. The view was beautiful. Tom and I fell asleep with our dog Trigger, lying at the bottom of Tom's bed. Now this is when things begin to get creepy. It was about 3 a.m. when I awoke to Trigger growling. I didn't find this particularly unusual because my dad suffers from insomnia, so sometimes when he can't sleep he sits in our sitting room at home and watches some TV. Like I said, Trigger is extremely overprotective and growls at any noise he hears. But that's when I noticed that there was no light coming from under my door. My dad never just sits in the dark. I whispered to Trigger, telling him to be quiet as Tom slept, but his growling soon turned to barking, which woke Tom up. He asked me what was going on, but I said Trigger must have heard some deer or something outside. After all, we were in the middle of the woods. Suddenly our bedroom door swung open and the light switch was turned on. My eyes stung as I tried to focus on whoever it was at the door. It was my dad. "Were you two laughing just now?" he asked as he turned to look at Tom, his eyes wide and his face pale. "No," I replied as he moved over towards our curtain, pulling it back as he looked out into the pitch-black wilderness. "What are you looking at?" Tom asked as our dad closed the curtains again. "Nothing. Just go back to sleep." I was kind of creeped out that my dad didn't say anything about what he was doing, but he turned our light off and we tried falling back asleep again. Of course, I couldn't. I was wide awake for the rest of the night, flinching at pretty much every noise. It was about 4:30 a.m. when I finally drifted off, but it must have been moments later I heard strange crunching noises coming from outside our window. I was sure this wasn't some sort of animal. It sounded like footsteps. I had this overwhelming feeling of fear, and I pulled the covers over my face, sweat beginning to cover my forehead. I then heard a faint tapping on our window which lasted for a good few minutes. I was so petrified I couldn't move. Trigger was awake by this point, as I saw his face turn towards the window, his ears pointed and listening intently. The tapping started again, but louder this time, causing Trigger to bare his teeth. What happened next was the most terrifying thing that has ever happened to me. "I know you're in there, little guy," this deep and husky voice whispered as a horrible shiver went down my spine. "Why don't you come out here and play with me?" Initially, I was filled with rage. I thought that it was bound to be one of my cousins playing a stupid prank on us, so I leaned forward and peeked through a gap in the curtain, ready to give them hell for scaring the shit out of us. But standing there wasn't any of our cousins. It was a creepy old man who was around 60. His hair matted and his clothes looked dirty and ancient. He was stroking the window with his hands, breathing on it as he spoke. I went into protective mode. I didn't know what else to do, so I grabbed my dad's hunting rifle from under my bed and pulled the curtain back. "Get the hell out of here or I'll shoot!" I felt adrenaline rush through me as the creepy man's eyes widened and the most terrifying smile appeared across his face. Trigger began barking louder than I've ever heard him bark. My parents obviously heard the commotion and came running through to our room, turning the light on. My mom screamed as she saw the old man through the window. Trigger fiercely continued to bark at the man. My dad yelled at the man, telling him that the police were on their way, but the man legged it back into the woods. Tom was petrified, but I was angry more than anything else. How could some sicko do this? I was just extremely glad I had the rifle. The cops caught the guy just a few minutes later and arrested him. I found out a couple days later that the creepy man was homeless and living in the woods, and he was suffering from a lot of mental issues. It scares me to death to think about what could have happened to my brother if I hadn't been there. We spent the remainder of Christmas Day at the cabin, but we stayed in our Aunt Billy's cabin overnight. There was no way we were sleeping on our own after what happened. We went home first thing on Boxing Day and never looked back. My dad only told me the other day that he knew someone was hanging around our cabin, so he intentionally left the rifle under my bed in case I had to use it in self-defense. He did that because he didn't want to scare any of us. He called the cops after he heard the guy laughing outside his bedroom window, singing nursery rhymes. He knew it would take a while for the cops to reach the cabin. Safe to say, that was the scariest experience of my life. So, weird, creepy old guy in the middle of the woods, please, please, let's not meet again. It was December and Christmas was right around the corner. It was late, around 3 a.m. or so. I was sick, so I was on a strange sleep schedule at the time. I was bored, and none of my friends were online, so I decided to venture into a site called Omegle. I went on there quite often at the time, mainly to troll people. But tonight I decided to have some actual conversations with people. Big mistake. So I decided to talk to people under the anime tag, because people on there seem generally cool for the most part. Of course, there's always horny teenagers looking for a girlfriend no matter what tag you're on. I eventually find someone who isn't a bot, and who doesn't immediately ask ASL, meaning age, sex, location. We'll call her Azula. Azula asks me what my favorite anime is, and I jokingly said Fat Albert. I knew I said I didn't want to troll, but I couldn't help myself. A conversation ensues after that about anime and such, and she seems like a genuinely decent person. She then asks for my email. I gave her my spam email, knowing that there's no real harm in giving that out. So we continue our chat in a Google Plus hangout. She starts to ask to video chat. I declined, telling her that I don't even voice chat with my real life friends, but she keeps on persisting, and I keep telling her no. I was starting to think that she was actually some pedophile. I told her that I don't feel comfortable revealing my face to anyone online, and I really don't want to voice chat. She then says that she'll send me a picture of her face if I send her a picture of mine, so I let her send hers first. I then did a reverse image search to see if the photo was fake. Nothing came up anywhere, so I knew it wasn't fake. So reluctantly, I took a picture of myself and sent it to her. I figured it couldn't do any harm. She then kept persisting to video chat. I kept telling her no. I then turned my computer off because I was tired and annoyed. I didn't really think much of it, but I was planning on blocking her the next day. A day later, I get on my computer and was about to block her, but as soon as I go on, she messaged me immediately. At this point, I thought she was either stalking me or had no life and was at her computer all day, so I went ahead and talked to her. She apologized for being pushy and explained that she didn't have many friends and just wanted to get to know me. I said it was fine. So we talked about anime, as well as video games and such. A normal conversation for me. The next day we talk again. She wants to video chat. I told her that I'd voice chat, since I did that all the time. Once we were in the voice call, she kept asking me to turn my camera on. Her camera was on, so at this point I was sure she wasn't a 40-year-old man. I told her that I didn't feel comfortable doing that, She told me that she wanted to video chat to make sure I wasn't some 40-year-old pedo. My voice was quite deep, so I understood why. So again, reluctantly, I turned camera on. After that, everything seemed to be okay. I could tell there was something wrong, but I figured she was just socially awkward. After that, things were okay for a few weeks, but one day she randomly told me that she had a crush on me. I told her that I don't do online relationships, and she got really depressed after that. She kept saying how every guy, 5 in total I believe, has turned her down, and she's really sad about it. I didn't really know what to do at this point. I felt really bad for her because I knew how it felt to be rejected, and how awkward it is to stay friends with them afterwards. So I made one of the dumbest mistakes of my life. I said that I actually did like her back. Nowadays, there's no way in hell I would have done any of this, but I was 14 at the time. I was young and dumb, so just keep that in mind. So I basically was in a fake, fabricated online relationship at this point. I didn't consider her my girlfriend, and only one of my friends, we'll call him Eric, even knew about her existence. In fact, one day he was in a group chat with us. That's when things started to get strange. In the group chat, we had a decent conversation, but it got weird after I left. Azula started asking Eric really personal questions about me. Eric gave her the runaround, telling her that she should be asking me this stuff. She was asking questions like what my last name was, where I lived, etc. Eric didn't tell me about this, but I saw in the group chat. I thought it was really strange that she would ask him these questions, knowing that I would see them when I got back. Anyway, at this point she kept asking me what my last name was. Remember, Azula was very persistent, and she wouldn't stop asking a question even if you decline. So I find out she goes on Facebook and searches every person with the same first name as I do. My name is fairly common, so there's a lot of people on there with my first name. I couldn't believe it. She spent days trying to find my Facebook. I've never seen so much dedication. Red flags were definitely going off at this point. She eventually finds my Facebook and sends me a friend request. I decline it because I was very pissed that she was invading my privacy. She then started messaging me on Google Hangouts, asking me about my family members. My friends on Facebook weren't on private for some reason. She literally wrote down a list of them all, asking them how they were related to me. I got really scared at this point. I knew I had a stalker and I did not know what to do. I blocked her on everything and deleted everything on the net that had my real name in it. I had officially went rogue. She eventually emails me on another email of mine. Don't ask me how she found it. I honestly have no clue. Perhaps it was on my Facebook before I deleted it. Anyway, she spams that email with countless messages per day. I blocked her and the email stopped. I didn't hear from her for about a month. Then one day I accidentally delete an important email, so I went to the trash to recover it. In my trash were hundreds of emails from her. I nearly soiled myself in fear. The last email was from that day, so in morbid curiosity I read some of the emails. What I found was nothing short of frightening. She told me that she thinks there is something wrong with her. Say it isn't so. And that she enjoys and gets off on the pain of others. And she said that she knows where I live and was going to fly over here and live with me. I was so scared at this point. I was honestly worried that she was going to kill me. I deleted that email account and have been off the grid ever since. So crazy, sadistic stalker on the internet, let's not meet ever again. I'm the youngest of 5, my siblings being 5, 6, 7, and 8 years older than me. So there were times when my parents were out of the house and my siblings, 1 or more, were left to kind of watch me. I was 10 years old and it was just me and my 16-year-old sister Dawn at the house. This took place in the summer of 1981. The phone rang and I answered it. The caller, who sounded very cheerful, immediately asked for my parents, by their first and last names. I remember thinking he sounded familiar, like maybe one of my dad's co-workers or something. Anyway, I told him that they weren't home and he sounded genuinely sad about it. He told me that my parents had agreed to collect some items for him, bag them in brown grocery bags, and leave them on the porch. They actually used to do this with clothes and such for charities, so thus far everything was making sense. After telling him, alright, he then asked if I could write down the list of things he needed. I grabbed a small pad of paper and pencil we kept by the phone and told him I could. He started out with a few normal items, I assume, since I don't remember what they were. And then he stops and asks me, "What's your favorite color?" Well, I was 10 and a girly girl, so I said, "Purple." And he responded, "Oh, so do you think that's a bit too much for a little girl's silk panties?" I kind of furrowed my brow, thinking it was a bit odd, but just answered, "No, I guess not." He told me to put it on the list. He then gave me a few more items and said, "Now this part is really important, okay? Are you ready?" I told him that I was, and he said, "I need 8 baby bottles of sperm." As you can imagine, I was sitting there writing in my 10-year-old handwriting, and I get to the word sperm, and I'm like, there's something not right about that word. I didn't know exactly what it was, but I knew it was not something someone should be asking a kid for. I told him to wait a minute. I set the phone down and ran into Dawn's room. She was lying on her bed reading a magazine, and I told her what he said. She literally leaped off the bed, shouting, "What?" and ran into the den. She grabbed the phone and was shouting, "Hello, hello," over and over. Of course, the creep had hung up. When my parents got home, I told them what happened and showed them the list. They were sufficiently creeped out, but this was before caller ID and other such tools. I told them his voice sounded familiar enough that if I heard it, I'd recognize it, and that I thought he might work with my dad or something. Other than that, there was not much else to do. At Christmas, Mom and I were decorating the tree and the phone rang. I was standing right by it, so I turned and picked it up. It was the same man, and he just said, "Merry Christmas." Unfortunately, I panicked and just slammed the phone down. I still wish I would have calmly handed it over to my mom, because she might have recognized who it was, and my dad would have been happy to take care of the situation. I didn't though, and as far as I know, he never called back again. I will never ever forget that happening to me. And now all these years later, I still think I would recognize his voice. And while I don't actually want to meet him, as an adult, I'd like to punch him in the face. Just a little background check. I'm a female and was 12 when all this started. And I lived in a very calm part of my estate in Ireland. My mom is involved too, but not as much as I am. So on to the story now. It was 12 a.m. and had just turned Christmas Day when we got a knock on our door. I was taught not to open the door to strangers, especially when it's 12 a.m., so I just ignored it and hoped that whoever it was would just go away. About 3 minutes later, I heard another knock, but this time it was like a huge bang at the door. I was terrified, so I didn't know what to do. So, by instinct, I went and got my mom to answer. When she answered, this drunk Romanian guy who had a very scruffy beard and was wearing a white hoodie was just standing there and asked, "Can I walk your dog? I have my dog with me, so she'll be fine." And my mom, of course, said no. I was a bit away from the door, but that's all I heard him say. My mom kept politely asking for him to go away, and when she had enough, she closed the door. The next morning, I was sitting having my breakfast, and my mom brings up the incident to my dad. So me being me, I started eavesdropping and took off one of my headphones. I was really scared because that's the guy who stalks me in the bushes while walking Molly, our dog. When she said that, my heart sank so deep into my chest that it started to hurt. So you'd think that's the end of it. No, it wasn't. Fast forward 3 years and I'm home alone watching TV upstairs in my room, when I just had this sudden urge to look outside my window. And let me tell you, I was terrified. The same man was standing in my empty driveway looking up into my bedroom. I got so freaked out and without hesitation immediately closed my curtains over. No more than 10 seconds later, there was a huge bang at my front door. I heard the handle being played with. I was fucking paralyzed. When he finally stopped with the door handle, I heard the windows downstairs shatter into shards, and I heard him climb in. I sprinted into my bathroom and locked the door behind me, bringing my phone with me. I hear really fast thumps go up the stairs, and hear my bedroom door open, and once he realizes I'm not there, he immediately goes to the bathroom door handle. He starts trying to kick the door down, and was screaming that he would rape and kill me. I call 999, and within 5 minutes I hear, "Put your hands up, do it now." I was so fucking terrified that it took me almost 30 minutes to get out of the bathroom. The officer told me that he had a backpack, and in there they found dildos, condoms, a rope, a gag, bleach, and a meat cleaver. Also, I want to add that if the officers had arrived 5 minutes later, then I don't know what would have happened to me. as within 5 kicks he would have kicked the door down, and I don't want to know what would have happened to me if he did get in. This was a truly horrifying experience. When I was 20, it was really hard to find work in my hometown. I eventually managed to get a job though, as an administrator. I don't know what this sort of place is called in English, but I'll describe it to you. People who commit serious crimes, usually arson, murder, or similar, who are believed to suffer from mental issues or personality disorders, are placed there instead of in a normal prison. You know what kind of place I'm speaking of? Yeah, that's where I worked. I'm a rather petite woman, just over 50 kilograms, and looking years younger than my actual age. Easy target, you might say. I rarely interacted with the interns, apart from being the one to let them in and out of the gate when they had reason to be outside the facility, and then always escorted by the guards. There was one man, a short, broad dude from the Philippines, who always looked at me with the creepiest smile you ever saw, eyeing my ID badge closely every time. I, of course, had no right to know what those people had done to end up in this place, but my boss felt the need to tell me about this guy. "Watch out for him," she said. "He's a serial stalker and arsonist. Never let your guard down. People think he's stupid, but he's not. He's actually over average intelligent." The summer turned into fall, and in September that year I left that job to go back to university. It wasn't until 2 years later in December, just before Christmas, that it happened. I was shopping for a bracelet for my sister when I hear a whisper right next to my ear. "Hello, Josephine." I turn around and find myself eye to eye with the stalker/arsonist guy. He had remembered my name too. I didn't buy the bracelet, I left in a hurry, certain that he had only been out on one of his short visits outside, and that the guards were close by watching. They do that for letting the interns train for being let out again. They give them freedom under a watchful eye 1 hour per week or so, to see how they handle it. I didn't see any guards that I recognized, but I was sure they were there. I went home. My sister and I have a flat, each on the top floor of an apartment building. And when we were both home, we keep our doors open, and kids and pets can roam freely between our homes. We were in my flat decorating the Christmas tree when I heard the steps. Not the light steps of my niece, not the fast steps of my fiancé. It was the heavy, slow, determined steps of the arsonist. He had found me, and he was on his way up. I threw myself at the door, locking it shut. My sister had no idea what was going on, but I told her to take the kids, go into the bathroom, lock the door, and call the cops. I stood by the locked front door, listening to the steps. I could hear him roam around in my sister's apartment. He had found her Christmas cards and was reading the names of her children out loud. Then he started searching for something, while whistling happily. My sister, always a rock, was keeping the kids calm in the bathroom while I was listening to him, merrily explaining that he needed tools that could break the lock open. Since I knew who he was and the police knew who he was, they arrived very quickly, and soon the situation was resolved. It turned out since there were too few places to keep those people, some had been let out early to make room for those considered more dangerous. I guess he found me by chance that day in the store, and decided there and then to go after me. It was a frightening experience, and if my boss hadn't warned me so vigorously about this man, I wouldn't have acted as fast as I did. So this occurred many years ago, but it will forever stay with me, and change my views on allowing my kids to ever have their own separate phone line. It was a few weeks after Christmas and my parents had gotten me my own personal phone, with my own separate phone line, because that was the cool thing back then, before the cell phones went big, and I had given my friends the number because who wouldn't, right? Anyway, it was about 3 a.m., and I had been sleeping when my phone begins to ring. I thought, that's odd, who can be calling me this early? We all have to be up for school in the morning. So I answered it, but all could be heard was breathing on the other end. I laughed it off as someone just messing with me and hung up. I tried returning to sleep, but my phone rang again. This time I answered it and said, "Who is this?" Nothing, just breathing again. At this point I was beginning to get irritated. I told him to stop calling me and hung up. Laid down again for about 30 minutes when my phone rang for yet the 3rd time that morning. I was mad, so I answered and said, "This isn't funny, I'm trying to sleep. I have school in the morning, stop calling me." This time there was a reply. It was a man's voice, sounded very gravelly, and he laughed and said, "I can see you. You're very pretty, why don't you come out and play in the snow with me?" With that, I hung up and started crying. I ran to my parents' room and woke up my mom, telling her what happened, and she woke my dad up and made me tell him what had happened. So they both get up and my dad goes into my room and checks the windows and everything, makes sure all the locks on the doors are locked, and proceeds to tell me it's just someone playing a sick joke and that everything will be fine, and tells me to just unplug my phone from the outlet. So I finally go back to sleep until my mom wakes me up for school. I get up and start getting ready, open my blinds to my window that leads to the backyard, and noticed on this very frosty morning that there were handprints all over my window. I called my parents and they're totally freaking out. My dad immediately calls the police. The police come out to take a report and look at the evidence, and they decided they went to go to the backyard. Sure enough, there were a set of footprints in the snow that led right up to my window. They had gone from the front of the house to the back to my window, back to the back door, and back to the front door. The police think the guy had tried to get into the house. This happened a few years ago while I was still in high school. I was 17 at the time. I grew up in a small town and my mother, sister, and I had moved to a larger city. I was home alone with my little sister, who was 3, as my mom regularly worked night shifts, and I was a built-in babysitter. It was winter, just before Christmas, so by about 5 p.m. it was essentially black outside. This happened at around 9 p.m. I would let my sister stay up late with me, and once she fell asleep cuddling with me on the couch, I would move her to her room. It helped to eliminate temper tantrums about bedtime. So we were laying on the couch when our dog started to lose her mind. Our dog was a big floppy basset hound named Matilda. She was incredibly sweet and would rarely ever bark, but at this point she was growling, and the fur on her back is standing up. I immediately knew something very wrong was happening, and I picked my sister up and brought her to the washroom, which had no windows. I sat her in the tub and told her not to move, and I locked the door from the inside and shut it. I go back to the living room, my sister safe and sound, and grab my cell phone, ready to call for help if I needed to, when someone starts banging on my door like crazy. I look through the peephole and see a man standing outside. His face is covered in blood. Matilda is still losing her mind, and she's trying to force herself between me and the door. My heart is pounding in my ears and it feels like my stomach is about to fall out of my butt, and I have no idea what to do, so I move away from the door and just stand there silently freaking out. The banging gets louder, and then I start to hear voices and yelling. This guy is pleading with me to open the door. I go and look in the peephole again, and there's another guy there beating on the blood-covered guy. At this point, I'm a small, defenseless 17-year-old girl, and there were 2 seemingly large men outside, one of which is beating the crap out of another guy, covered in blood as he's begging me to let him in my house. I finally call 911. I give them the necessary information while I'm shaking uncontrollably, and they send police, fire, and ambulance. I genuinely don't think I made any sense during the phone call. I'm surprised they were able to narrow down what my address actually was. When the scene was finally taken care of, a police officer knocks on my door. We later found out the bloody guy was jumped a block or 2 away and was beaten pretty badly. He made a run for it and made it to my house, and the dude that was assaulting him caught up with him. At this point, my dog is still going ballistic. My toddler sister is locked in the bathroom, crying hysterically, and I feel like I'm about to die from how much adrenaline is pumping through my body. I open the door for them, and part of the front of it is covered in blood from the hurt guy pounding on it. And I just break down. I am still shaking and shivering from everything, and I start sobbing hysterically. I manage to get my dog to relax enough to let the officers come inside, and they help me get my sister out of the bathroom, and they call my mom at work to tell her what's happened. They took my statement about the whole ordeal, and stay with my sister and I until my mom gets home. Needless to say, that night my mom, my sister, and I all slept in my mom's room. In hindsight, I know the hurt guy wasn't trying to scare or hurt my sister or I. He was just trying to get help, and I felt terrible that I didn't let him in, despite it being the right thing to do. But still, bloody-faced guy and bad man, let's please never meet again. A few weeks ago, I was moving some stuff around in my room, and accidentally broke the glass on my window. It was a small crack, and didn't fully break, but it was enough that cold air and condensation were getting in, and making my window ice up. So I threw a space heater in my room to try warming the place up. Now, we have an old house. and if we have 2 heaters on at the same time, the fuses blow and shuts off power to the backside of the house. The other night got particularly cold, so I plugged in the heater to the outlet closest to my bed. This outlet was controlled by the light switch, so when I turn on the switch, the heater goes on. It's one of those ones with dials, not power buttons. When it got time for bed, my room was sufficiently warm, so I turned out my heater. I told my parents my room was warm enough, so they put their heater on for the night. Fast forward to about 2 a.m., and I hear some noise in my brother's room. I think nothing of it and just shake it off. I just laid there and the noise had stopped, so I lay back down and tried to fall asleep. Then I started hearing noises in the kitchen, which was odd as no one would be rummaging through the kitchen drawers at this time of night. I start to get a little worried and check my phone. I see a snap from my brother from about 1 a.m. He was out getting wasted with friends, so I calmed down and think he just got an Uber. I was wide awake at this point, so I checked my texts and email, and got back on Snapchat. This is when I really started freaking out. On the stories, there was my brother, posted 13 minutes ago at a buddy's house, who lived more than 20 miles away. It wasn't him in the house. Reading too many LNM stories. I had put an old broken hockey stick in my room in case of emergencies. Not the best weapon, but it's what I got. So I quietly get out of bed to turn on the light to find it. I had forgotten my heater was plugged in, so as soon as I flipped the switch, the light went out. But so did the rest of the power. It also just so happens that on that end of the house is where our CO detector is, and when power is cut, it beeps. Loud. Whatever the case was, this startled whoever was in the house, and the kitchen door opened quickly. I woke up my parents and let them know what happened. Once we got power on, we noticed my brother's bedroom window was wide open. We saw footprints beneath my window, but thankfully the ice had frozen the window shut from the outside. Whoever was in my house climbed into my brother's room and was rummaging around the house. The bags left over under the Christmas tree had been torn through, and all the kitchen drawers were open. We contacted the police, who took down the information and said this kind of behavior is normal around holidays. People find empty houses and look for gifts, / cash, things of that sort. I don't know what would have happened if I had come face to face with this guy and my hockey stick, but for now, would-be burglar, let's not meet. So this happened around Christmas time a few years ago. I had taken my 5-year-old niece to the mall to get her picture taken with Santa. While we were standing in line, I noticed a little old man and a lady sitting on a bench, watching the kids waiting to see Santa. The old man came up to us and told my niece that she looked very cute. I told him thank you, and he went back to sit on the bench with his wife. We got the picture taken and had been waiting a while for the picture to be printed. I asked the photographer why our picture hasn't been printed yet. He told me that my mother had already gotten the picture and pointed at the little old lady who had been watching us in line before. I went after the old man and presumably his wife, and told them to give me the picture back. The old man seemed embarrassed and told me that his wife grabbed our picture by accident, and she had meant to take their granddaughter's picture. He apologized, but I had a weird gut feeling that something was off about them. Next, I took my niece to the merry-go-round, and like magic, the old people were there too, still without any kids. The lady waved at my niece and smiled a big toothless smile at us. At this point, I decided it was best if we left the mall. I took my niece to get lunch at her favorite restaurant that was almost all the way across town from the mall. I felt much more relaxed as we had lunch, completely forgetting about these weird old people from before. As we were driving home, my niece spotted a playground that is close to a different, much smaller mall. She begged me to stop at the playground. There was a young man there with a little boy on the swings, so we weren't alone. Another car pulled into the parking lot shortly after we got there. We played for a little while, and I noticed that no one had gotten out of the car. I looked at the driver's side of the car, and sure enough, it was the same old people. They had followed us from the mall to the restaurant and then to this playground. The man was staring straight at me and my niece, like he was hunting us. I noticed that he had his arm down and was moving it up and down. It clicked, he was masturbating in his car. I didn't want to scare my niece, so I subtly alerted the young man who was also at the park. I got my niece into the car quickly and drove into the mall's parking lot, and called the cops and the mall security. I didn't want to stick around for long for my niece to see the man getting arrested, so I gave the cops my number and left to my dad's work, where I figured we would be safe in case the old people followed us again. The cops called me back a few hours later and told me that by the time they had gotten there, the couple were gone, but they were looking for the description of the car I gave. It makes me physically sick every time I think about the fact that these old people are out about and seem totally harmless, when they are perverts, sex offenders, or even worse, kidnappers. So creepy old people, let's not meet. I headed out to my local mall a few days ago, determined to do some serious Christmas shopping. As a bit of a reference, I'm only about 5'5" and quite thin. I have a shaggy pixie cut and prefer the comfort of big t-shirts and skinny jeans most of the time. So I get mistaken for a 12-year-old boy a lot more than I would like to admit. So there I was, Christmas list in hand and ready to take this thing on like a champ. I had more money than I've had for Christmas in a long time, and I was really excited to get some excellent gifts for my best friend and parents. I was walking along on the ground floor headed for the stairs when I passed this lady who was giving out hand lotions. She had a few small packs in her hand and a larger bottle on a little table beside where she stood. Okay, cool, I think to myself. Grab a sweet-ass lotion pack and keep going. I didn't want to be rude and just keep walking, so I took the lotion and smiled in a sort of thanks for the lotion lady kind of way. Big mistake. Before I had the opportunity to keep going, this chick grabs my wrist and lets out a squeal that would hurt a banshee's ears. You keep your nails natural? Hell freaking yeah, I do. I clean for a living, so there's not much point in getting them done unless I'm going somewhere special. Sure, I said, then tried to wrench myself free. To my dismay, this lady has a hold on me like a hungry anaconda, and I knew I'd be stuck listening to her sales pitch. I was a bit confused as to why she had picked me out of an entire crowd of people walking, especially because the boots and studded jacket usually scared off potential creeps, and probably friends too, but hey. Unfortunately, all the leather and studs in the world did nothing for my baby face, so I probably still seemed easy prey for this asshole. She's all, "Look how great this makes your hands and nails," while all I could think was why she thought I cared. My hands were all scarred and calloused from various DIY mishaps and years of guitar practice, so there isn't much that can be done for them. I attempted to get away by letting her know I wasn't interested, and that I had to get back to shopping before it got too late. She batted her eyelashes and said that, lucky me, since I was so cute, she would give me an entire set for the low price of $20, if I followed her to go get it from her stand upstairs. I had just come from the top floor of the mall, since there were exits/entrances on both floors, and I knew for a fact that the only kiosk up there was an eyebrow threading place. Like hell, I was going anywhere besides GameStop to get my little brother a new game for Christmas, so I declined. She tightened her hold and just repeated the sales pitch, this time asking me weird questions in between trying to convince me to buy this lotion. How old are you? 19. Where do you go to school? I graduated. Do you have a sister? No. Where's your boyfriend? I don't have one. I tried again to tell her nicely, because I hate hurting people's feelings, to fuck right off and let me get back to Christmas shopping, when she stared me dead into my eyes and said, "Are you alone?" A million little alarms went off in my head, and I lied and told her I was there with my dad. She looked around and asked which one he was. I pointed out the most intimidating looking guy I could find, and she launched back into trying to sell me this product at warp speed, like she was in some kind of huge hurry. I told her again, more firmly this time, that I was not spending any money on her hand lotion. She started walking off in a random direction, still holding my wrist, and insisted that I come with her to see more of the products she was selling because surely I would want something, despite the fact that every freaking word out of my mouth said the complete opposite. I yanked my arm free and stood my ground, prepared to defend myself if she tried pulling me with her again. I am not buying anything from you. I need to get back to shopping. Before I could even turn away, she asked what I used to wash my face. A bit caught off guard, I told her, and she began launching a barrage of insults at me. Like, "You're too pale," and "Your skin is so dry," featuring my personal favorite. "It looks like a shedding lizard." Ouch, that hurt. I didn't put any stock into her petty attempts to insult me. People had complimented me on my skin before, and I liked the way I looked anyway. I walked away instead of throwing anything back at her, and headed upstairs to finish shopping. But before I left the mall that night, I marched my dry lizard skin right over to the nearest mall cop, and informed him that he had some rude-ass people working in the mall. I wasn't sure who else to tell, so I wasn't too surprised to see him scrunch up his face in confusion. I expected him to direct me to a sort of complaints desk or something similar, but nothing could have prepared me for what he said next. "We don't sell that here." Well, shit. I described the woman and told him the brand of lotion she had tried to get me to purchase, but he only shook his head and told me the vendor for that particular brand had not been coming around to the mall for years. On my way back out to the parking lot, I passed the spot where she had originally confronted me. There was no woman, no lotion samples, no vendor's cart. I later asked my cousin who worked in the mall if there was anyone selling the lotion there. She said no, and a quick peek at the mall's online directory confirmed that. I hate to think where we would have ended up had I followed her. So, sinister lotion vendor, let's not ever meet again.